Hi, this is Grandmaster Bryan Smith with ChessLessons.com, presenting the fourth and final part of my series on a tournament I recently played in the St. Petersburg Chess Club in St. Petersburg, Florida. This was the fourth round game. My opponent was named Josh Harrison, player rated 2112. So I start off with e4. He played e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, so for the Spanish, and he played bishop c5. Kind of a classical variation with a6, bishop a4 inserted. His move order in the opening was a little unusual. I didn't exactly find a way to exploit it. I suppose here you can play c3, but I wasn't sure about some things there. In any case, I decided to just castle. He played b5, bishop b3, and now d6. So it's all very similar to the Moeller variation, where the knight usually would be, well, knight f6 would actually be the Moeller variation. But by delaying the knight's development, he changes a few things. One of the things is that after knight f6, white can often play the move a4, when black has to either cede the a file by playing rook to b8, or play bishop b7, and then he won't have the possibility later to pin the knight with bishop g4. But by d6, now this knight, of course, can always come out from f6, but I have to worry about the early pin bishop g4, and also maybe the knight will not go to f6, or he even have some f5 move. Who knows? But in any case, black can transpose later with knight f6 if he wants to. So this is an interesting move order. And I'm not sure what... perhaps instead of castling, I could play c3 there. But here, if I play a4, then he can play bishop g4. And now there's a serious threat of knight to d4. So I would have to play c3 anyway, and we reach a kind of position which normally, well, it's of course playable for white, and this was, but I decided to start with c3. And here my opponent played bishop g4, so actually now he avoids just going back into the main line of the Moeller variation of the Spanish. With knight f6 would have been this variation with him sidestepping the early a4. So of course it's also a position white can play, d4, bishop b6, etc. But it's interesting. It was an interesting move order. But he decided to take further advantage with bishop g4, getting this pin, or try to take further advantage rather. And here I thought maybe he made a mistake. And I was not, I'd never seen this line of play before. So I played bishop d5, which was, it's a non-standard move, but it had some tactical ideas. So I found out later this has happened in a number of games. This is a line that's actually been analyzed some. And bishop d5 is played in a lot of games. Of course, white could have also played h3, or the d3 or something like that, but this looked like the way to exploit black's play. So I threatened the knight on c6, and he played queen to d7. He would like to play knight g to e7, defending the knight and attacking my bishop, but this would be met by bishop takes f7. Now that the queen is blocked from covering g5, I can do this, and after king takes, knight g5 checks the king and opens up an attack on the bishop. Even though I'll be a little bit behind in development, it won't matter because I'll be up a pawn, and his king will be running around and have a weakness on e6. So white is winning. Same if he declines the bishop, I'll go back with bishop to b3 and enjoy an extra pawn. So he played queen to d7, which is the only, well, bishop d7 would be also met by d4, which wouldn't be very good for black. So queen to d7. My idea was to play d4, and that's what I did. But this move was actually, while it's promising, interesting, it was not really played very much. Most games in the past have gone with white taking the pawn with bishop c6, which I thought about, but in general I just didn't really want to play this way. Queen takes c6, knight takes c5 is the idea. And then after bishop takes d1, knight takes c6, and the knight will get out. Black has the two bishops, but white has the extra pawn. It should be pretty, I think this position should be pretty promising for white, although in principle I didn't really like giving up the bishop like this, and I imagine maybe some bishop e2, bishop d3. It's better for white, but it's not that easy. It's not so simple. But he also could take on e5, queen takes g4, knight f6. It's another way of playing. He sacrificed a pawn, but now the queen is under attack and the pawn on e4. Here white's supposed to be better after some more play, queen g3 or something. But I decided to play directly in the center instead of this d4. And now my opponent immediately went wrong with a move you wouldn't think about on the surface. Bishop takes f3. You only make this move if you're trying to exploit something with calculation, but you have to check very carefully a move like this, because you're giving up the pinning bishop for the pinned knight and activating my queen. And so the move just, unless there's an ironclad tactical justification, it doesn't make sense. So I thought he was going to take on d4 first, and then after I take back, now take on f3, while he still has the opportunity. Because in this case, I have to take with the pawn, because if queen takes, he takes, knight takes d4, and I don't have any compensation really. So I'd have to take with the pawn. And then here, just as before, he can't take on d4. Knight can't capture because of bishop takes a8, and bishop can't capture because of bishop takes c6. And going back, actually, in this position also to point out, knight takes d4, bishop takes a8. I won a rook, and he doesn't have a strong enough attack. For instance, if bishop f3, gf, queen h3, threatens knight f3 followed by queen takes h2, but white can easily defend by just playing king h1, and if after knight takes f3, bishop f4. Or even knight to d2 is possible as well here, and white defends everything. So that didn't work, and again here also, bishop takes is just met by bishop takes c6. And so anyway, back to this, after bishop f3, gf3, I thought he would retreat the bishop to b6. And I was pretty happy with this position, but now that I look at it, it's not so clear. My point was that by bishop e3, or maybe I would insert a4 here, but I keep these pieces out of the game. But he does get this tempo with knight f6 or knight e7. And my king is, well, I very much like my unopposed light squared bishop. And I like the fact that I can use the g file. And maybe my pawns in the center will start rolling forward in the future someday. So I think it's a good position for white. But this is what black should have played, something like this. And here actually maybe he has some knight a5 moves, so it's not so simple. There also perhaps bishop e3 may not be the most accurate. Again, like I said, a4 is a possible move threatening to take on b5. There's also bishop g5 preventing his knight from easily getting out. So in any case here, he took on f3, which was very bad. I took with the queen, and now final mistake, e takes d4. He's trying to reach this position. In other words, if I would have taken with my g-pawn, he would retreat the bishop to b6 without having captured on d4. A clear benefit for black. But the problem was I can take with my queen, and after e takes d4, now I have this tactic e5, because I haven't already taken on d4. And this just wins the game right away. Instead of taking, he should have tried bishop b6, but black's position is very bad. For instance, queen g3 threatens g7, and also to win the pawn on e5, among other things. He took on d4. e5 is the key move, opening up the diagonal, the long diagonal. And now knight is under attack, so he took on e5. If instead the only other way to protect the knight without dropping the rook on a8, knight g to e7, then queen takes f7 is just easily winning for white. I can take g7 next move, for instance, winning, and after king d8, queen g7 is one way to go. winning material. So black took with a knight on e5. Well, threatens my queen. I don't have time to take his rook. He also plans c6, but I have the move bishop f7, clearing the diagonal. And now I'm going to take the rook on a8. So I win the exchange. Black has a lead in development, but it doesn't amount to anything because he still won't have his pieces, and white's pieces can come out pretty quickly, and black can't achieve anything in the meantime, and his own king is in trouble in the long term. So he took on f7. He has to take that bishop one way or another. Queen takes a8, and now king d7. So if king e7, I could get bishop at g5 check, so he avoided that. Now, not wanting to deal with some possibilities that he could play d3 in the future, I took on d4. Bishop takes d4, knight c3. So I just want to get these pieces out, keep him tied up on the back rank. So one of the problems for black is that it really doesn't have any compensation for the exchange at all, as he can't even move the knight from g8. And that's why he played h5, hoping to lift his rook up and then bring the knight out. But of course this is too slow. Other moves would not be leading anywhere either, though. I'm just playing bishop e3 next move, or I'm taking the a pawn, and so on. So here he played h5, bishop e3. If he takes, I take with my pawn on e3, of course, and now there's no attacking chances for black. There's communication with my king side. F-file is open, so I'll have rook f8, and I can also just take on a6 and begin attacking black that way. So black took on c3 instead. B takes c3, and now h4. Well, I don't want to allow h3, of course, which would give him some chances around my king with the light squares. So I stopped it with h3, and rook h5. This was his idea, clever idea, but it doesn't lead anywhere. It's white. Meanwhile, now I pick up a pawn on a6. With knight e3, protecting the pawn on b5 with the rook. He could do it some other way. I thought he would play queen c4 or queen d5, but for instance, bishop d4 is perfectly adequate, planning to just take his knight, and also planning to play a4 if the knight moves away somewhere, because now the b pawn will be pinned. So knight d3, I played a4, exploiting the position of the knight on d3, and black tried last charge with the cavalry, knight e7, a takes p5, knight d5. And now, using the fact that the knight on d3 again is unguarded, I played b6. So I create a passed pawn. Queen is attacking the knight. And here black played queen g6, protecting the knight on d3. And here I played b7, and my opponent resigned since he saw that his plan to threaten checkmate on g2, knight f4 would have been met by the trade, and then queen a4 check, picking up the knight as well. He could also have considered a trap like knight takes c3 if he wanted to play on f takes c3, rook g5, when if I get hasty with b8, he has rook takes g2, king h1, rook h2, with a draw, actually. I have to take it, and then queen g3, and black has perpetual. But I wouldn't have fallen for that, and instead I would have just played rook a2, for instance, protecting g2, and there's nothing black can do, and now b8 is coming next. So for this reason, black resigned, so I ended up the tournament with 4 out of 4. It was a good way to start playing chess again. So I hope you enjoyed these games and found some instructional material in them.